Right.
Boom, and we're live.
We're going.
We're going.
Welcome to the show, Father.
Thank you.
Yeah, Father Schumacher.
Good to
Welcome
be
to the
here.
Green Dragon.
Green
Yeah.
Dragon,
Yeah.
complete with a nice cheery fire
Yes.
and a little bit of port.
A little bit of port to warm the soul as we begin. Oh, you want me to dive right in then, Tom?
Yeah, I think you could lead this conversation because I know you and Father have quite a history.
A years long at
So-
this point conversation about history, politics,
Yes.
jiu-jitsu. Yeah,
All mixing and matching.
all mixing and
I
matching.
found, by the way, courtesy of the great historian Peter Brown,
Hmm.
the earliest reference I know of to a Christian professional athlete.
We're Christian professional athlete.
3rd century AD
Uh-huh.
in Asia Minor, professional wrestler,
Yeah.
Christian, and member of the city council at home after his retirement. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, his professional name was the Creeper.
The Creeper.
Creeper.
No, that would not one that would work well.
Not go well today.
Yeah. Something was lost in translation. Yeah, the Creeper.
Is there a story behind that? Like why is named the Creeper?
Yeah.
It might have had to do with the ancient Greek analog to the rear naked choke,
To rear naked choke.
as they thought of the legs, the hooks, as they would say today.
Mhm.
They thought of those as being sort of like a vine creeping.
Okay.
Oh.
So presumably he was the type to wrap up the legs, keep them captured, and then from there move on towards his finishing moves,
Exactly.
whatever they may be.
The Creeper.
The Creeper. Yeah.
Hmm.
That makes sense. I mean, and that's yeah, I mean, just last week at the dojo, we were Dom Sapien was given a lesson about, if you get the takedown, right? It's good to pass. You want to get to their chest and their arms, of course, right? It's good, but as the takedown happens, if all you manage is to just wrap up the legs,
That's something.
Don't give up on that grip. Wrap up the legs, keep them captured so that they can't then return to guard or what have you.
Little vignette was a reminder, among other things, of how diverse the life of the early church was.
Mm-hmm.
As we know from Hippolytus of Rome, that in the Roman church, catechumens who were professional athletes would have to swear off that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, over in Asia Minor, the middle of Asia Minor, there was someone who was a perfectly respectable citizen, member of the town council in retirement, and member of the church who was a professional athlete.
Okay.
When people talk about the early church, they have a tendency to imagine. Well, why they imagine this, I don't know, because all you need to know is no Christians today to discover that there's a diversity of opinions. So why should that not have been the case in the early church? But it still surprises people. They say the early church, early Christians did this, early Christians did that. Well, some did, and some probably didn't. We know that in the early 4th century, another example, there was Saint Maximilian, a North African saint, martyred for refusing to serve in the army.
Mm-hmm.
So a martyr for conscientious objection. You read that story, you think, okay, early Christians were conscientious objectors. No. We know from other impeccable sources that there were Christians who served in the army and served very well in the army, respectably in the army. Hippolytus of Rome, again, in the Roman church, you had to leave military service, a catechumen, at least as far as Hippolytus was concerned. But is Hippolytus an entirely accurate witness? There's another question.
The layers of historical inquiry.
So the early church this, the early church that, be a little bit careful. There was not only a broad spectrum of belief and practice outside of what was recognized as orthodox, but even within the bounds of what was recognized as orthodox Christianity, there was a variety of practice, which I think is a profoundly helpful thought for today's circumstances as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's that jumps at so many of the questions that modern Christians are facing. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a friend of mine about, where can a good Christian spend one's money, right?
Oh,
Can we spend money on art? Can we spend money on architecture? It was the specific topic of the conversation, knowing that in the world there are so many causes of people needing material aid of some kind, right? Can we really support the arts in the face of people who are going hungry?
And live by bread alone.
Well, it's true.
Yeah,
It's another kind of feeding that
Mm.
comes, of course, from the preaching of the gospel and from the sacraments, but also another kind of feeding that comes from the arts. That's an old discussion.
Mhm.
When Notre Dame de Paris was being built, the Parisian theologian Peter the Chanter, called the Chanter because officially his job was music at Notre Dame Cathedral. Would have been difficult because construction was going on.
Yeah.
But,
Enough to drive any chanter up the wall.
but he gave indications that he wasn't fond of all the resources being put into building Notre Dame Cathedral.
Really?
Money could be spent on the poor, but even in the late 12th, early 13th century, there was a response to that, even at the economic level. How many people are getting work through
Mm.
this project?
Mhm.
And perhaps giving them work, perhaps it's actually a better thing than just a handout.
Mm.
And when this is done, you're going to have something that people 500 years later,
Mm.
who knows how much later, but they had an awareness that they were building something that was going to last.
Right.
It was not just for their time. It wasn't even going to be completed in their generation.
Mm.
They had an awareness they were building something that in a sense would feed other generations.
Yeah.
There's a reductionism to some conversations about how Christians are to spend their money
Mm.
and use their resources. And I find that reductionism painful.
Mm.
I remember, shows my age, we were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the US Constitution. United States, not the ship, the Constitution of the United States of America.
Uh-huh.
Celebrating the
Not-
200th anniversary of that. And
Not the
there was
ship in the harbor at Boston.
this tremendous fireworks show in New York. And I remember some people whom I found annoying in my youth, and I still find them annoying. There were some people who were saying, well, instead of spending all this money on a big fireworks show, we should be blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
It's not flippant. I don't think it's flippant to recall the Lord's statement, the poor you always have with you. That doesn't mean you ignore them. The gospel today, whatever you do for the least of my brethren, you do for me.
Right.
But they're not the only thing going on.
Mm.
Is there room for partying as a Christian and spending some money on a party? The answer is yes.
Mm.
The Lord Jesus seems to indicate this with his comparison of the kingdom of heaven to a wedding feast. He
Mm.
seems to indicate this with his first miracle not being healing a leper or curing a blind man, but salvaging an endangered wedding party.
So a sort of small stakes affair on a certain from a certain perspective.
From a certain perspective. But who knows what a small stakes affair is?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
The pride, the self-esteem of the bride and the groom, the position of their family. Who knows? Who knows? I may be talking too much. I remember in college, we were watching a basketball game. I do not remember what teams were playing.
Uh-huh.
My friends and I were watching.
Do you remember who won?
Unfortunately, I think it might have been Georgetown.
Okay.
Might have been. They were playing another Catholic school. Maybe it was Georgetown and
It's Gonzaga or something like that.
Villanova.
Villanova.
Mm.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
Augustinian. Georgetown and Villanova. And the Villanova fan, half tongue in cheek, half not, made a little bit of a prayer on behalf of Villanova versus Georgetown. I was willing to second that.
Right.
Someone, I went to college at Catholic University of America across town.
Hmm.
And one of the things, parenthesis, one of the things that badly got on my nerves is when I'd come home here in Wyoming and I'd tell the people I go to Catholic University of America in Washington, DC, they say, oh, that's Georgetown, isn't it? No, it is not. So it gave me a certain attitude about Georgetown.
Georgetown, yeah.
Yes.
Well, Georgetown has a certain attitude about themselves.
Oh, they
It might be,
do.
yeah. Which might
Anyway.
encourage one to root against them.
Anyway, another friend, third friend in the group, made a remark about, does God really care about who wins a basketball game?
Hmm.
And I thought, well, I said this. I'm going to stick with this all these years later. I don't know.
Hmm.
The obvious thing to do is say he doesn't care about who wins a basketball game, but that might be too obvious. As he sees how everything connects. For all I know, and for all you know, he would know, you and I don't. For all I know, Villanova winning this game might be the difference between someone committing suicide tomorrow and not. That
Right.
sounds dramatic, but all these things do add up in people's minds.
Yeah.
How do things connect to each other? Who knows? He knows. So again, just as I hesitate about saying the early church this,
Hmm.
hesitate a little bit. You can say some did. That doesn't mean everyone did. Similarly, I hesitate about saying this is important to God or this isn't important. Now, some things he tells us, this is important to me, like whatever you do for the least of my brethren, you do for me, words of the Lord. But unless he says, I don't care about this, unless he has said that somewhere, I am reluctant to say it's unimportant to him.
The only example I can think of that, I mean, he does tell Saul in the Old Testament that he would prefer, is it obedience to sacrifice, right?
Obedience to sacrifice.
After Saul goes and makes sacrifices that would have been properly done by a priest. Is that correct?
Saul oversteps his bounds,
Ah,
which is really the sin of pride.
ah,
I'm not going to wait for an authorized person
hmm,
to show up. It's not like it was an emergency situation.
ah,
Not really.
yeah.
There's not a matter of life and death.
Mm-hmm.
Just wait for Samuel to show.
Mhm.
Samuel's late. Prophets, what does Gandalf
Prophets are
say?
not like wizards. They
They're
do
not-
not always arrive when they intend.
They are like wizards. They arrive when they intend to arrive. So wait for Samuel to show up. Saul didn't wait. He took an initiative that wasn't his to take.
No.
One thing that does emerge in the scriptures is that there is genuine value placed. It can be exaggerated. Hence the Lord Jesus' correction of the Pharisees, but there is a genuine value placed on law and order.
Interesting.
Yeah, you should never read. Let's say this, I will say, you should never read the Gospels as Jesus preaching some sort of happy hippie anarchy.
He existed outside the current political order, but that doesn't mean he didn't have an order of his own. Is that what you're getting at?
No, it's he obeyed the law of Moses.
Ah, okay.
You cannot find a case of him disobeying the law of Moses.
Okay.
He corrected the tendency of the Pharisees to interpret it as strictly as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, the disciples are walking through a field and they pick little heads of grain. It's on the Sabbath, and they pick some heads of grain and munch on those. They're working on the Sabbath. This is ridiculous. Question of interpretation, but we do not find him recommending work on the Sabbath. It's not an anarchy. He respects the law. The scriptures have a certain respect for law and order to the point that St. Paul tells us, pray for the emperor, pray for those in authority. It's an appropriate thing to remember on President's Day. Pray for those who are in authority. Well, who's the emperor when Paul writes? Most likely Nero. You pray for those in authority, not because they are the best and the brightest. Almost always they're mediocre. You're commenting on how, as much as I love history, I tend to have, in your view, a somewhat dim view of its major figures. Well, I don't think it's a dim view. It's just when you look at them closely, they are startlingly normal, which is to say that not only do they have weaknesses,
They have flaws. Yeah.
Genuine, bona fide, real flaws. But that doesn't mean you don't respect them.
What's the I look at the state of what I would call our camp, right? I mean, and I'll go out on a limb here and say our camp seems to be generally composed of fairly conservative, typically religious, of people across the country, and there is this hesitation to have any allegiance to any leader. What's the given that leaders almost always display their human weaknesses on the stage of human affairs, always
Some more spectacularly than others.
What trust can you put in these human institutions and ultimately in these human people?
Well, put no trust in princes and mortal men in whom there is no help. People will cite that Psalm verse. Oh, those are levels of trust, aren't there? There is a reasonable expectation, and in a political system such as ours, which has at least elements of democracy, the electorate has the right, and I would say the duty, to evaluate this. You can trust them to do their basic job. And if you conclude that this one can't be trusted to do his basic job, you need to replace him. But until you replace him by lawful means, you respect him. One of the turning points of history is more than one turning point, but was in the 11th century, the great investiture controversy. This is the first time when political thinkers in the Christian world were suggesting that a sovereign could be replaced. I think, I don't have notes in front of me, it's off the top of my head, but I think it was a pro-papal German writer, Managold of Leitenbach, or something like that. That's fun to
What a
say.
name, yeah.
Managold of Leitenbach.
Can we get that one more time?
Managold of Leitenbach. I think that's who it was. I don't have notes in front of me, and I think that's who it was, who compared the emperor to a shepherd. That was fairly standard, deeply rooted in the scriptures. But he went on to say, you fire an incompetent shepherd. We have a right to expect those who are in power. We have a right to trust that they will do their basic job. And if we discover that they can't be trusted to do their basic job, they should be replaced. People first talked about that in terms of political theory in the 12th century. Christians first talked about that. This is a step beyond St. Paul's advice. Pray for those in authority. But now that we have a largely Christian society, a situation in the 12th century or 11th century, I should have said, now we have a basically Christian society. Don't we have a responsibility? Christians can't just say somebody else will take care of it. What is our responsibility then? To obey the law, to respect lawful authority, but to make sure that in our system there is a lawful way to remove what the medievals called rex inutilis, a useless king.
Useless king.
You can't be trusted to do his basic job. They're all going to have flaws, but there's a basic job they need to do. They need to preserve essential law and order and the basic security of the citizens. And if they can't do that, they need to be replaced. The Roman system, which passed on to being the Byzantine system, has been described as a despotism tempered by assassination. We can't. And it's true. The way you dealt with Imperator Inutilis was, one way or another. We can't have that.
Right.
In a constitutional order, there is a way of dealing with a useless ruler. Useless not in the sense of having flaws, because they all have flaws, but he can't be trusted to do his basic job. I was reading the Bishop Saint Gregory of Tours. They call it History of the Franks.
Yeah.
His intention was a little more religious than that, but I was reading his description of the Frankish king Clovis, or Ludovic, Louis I, as far as the French are concerned. And some people are startled by that because Gregory of Tours, in their view, seems to approve of Clovis, Ludovic's ruthless behavior, but he doesn't approve of it. For him, Louis I, Clovis, Ludovic, Ludwig, for him, Clovis is a David figure. Basically, you can trust him to do his job. He's not someone you want to mess with. You don't want to mess with David either.
No,
He's
no,
not
that's-
someone you want to mess with. And he's flawed. But as we might say today, he has your back. He takes care of his people.
Mm.
He'll do the job. And we have to be able to trust in that the leaders will do their job, their basic job.
I think it was a conversation we had about 2 years ago. We were talking about, I believe it was in the 4th century, Augustine and then his immediate successors, who first started to deal with this question of, whoa, now Christians are now running the empire,
Right.
or the parts of the empire that remain to us. Once upon a time, we could see the Christian community as sort of this persecuted, and frankly underground
And if
community,
not actively persecuted, certainly on the margins.
But all of a sudden, am I correct in thinking it's
Yeah.
the 4th century?
It happened in a generation.
Yeah. That all of a sudden we need to think of, shoot, Christ himself did not leave us a testament in the Gospels of how to handle us being in charge of all
That's
this.
We can't just say other people are going to take care of it. We have to take care of it.
Right.
And again, the Gospels do not give direct. I argue they give indirect, but they do not. The Gospels and the epistles do not give direct guidance about how to be a Christian king, a Christian general, a Christian president.
How about a Christian, like a Christian tax collector?
No,
Right.
exactly.
I mean, Paul gives counsel to soldiers, yes.
A little bit,
Yeah. But it's a line or two.
very brief, but it's a very different thing from being in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's why Augustine is considered the father of the just war theory.
Mm.
Because prior to that, the assumption was the safety of the empire was going to be taken care of by non-Christians.
Mm.
We'd pray for them. Christians always insisted that we pray for the emperor. We won't pray to him. But now we're in charge.
Mm.
And we can't just say, we can't just say, we're going to take care of this by prayer. Things have to be done. Not only do things have to be done, but some of those things are going to be kind of rough. In early American history, there was an episode that the Quakers did not handle well. Frankly, they were pacifists and quite doctrinaire pacifists.
Mm.
And there was a nest of pirates in the Delaware River. What to do? Do we just put up with the piracy? Do we root out the pirates? But we're pacifists, we're Quakers, we're friends. So in the end, they resorted to paying somebody else to take care of the pirates. Okay, you've preserved your pacifism, but is that really ethically satisfactory?
Right. It's not ethically integral, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
basically just opened your wallet to pass the problem on down the river, quite literally. in this
Somebody
case.
else has to do the rough work
Yeah.
of getting rid of the pirates.
Pirates.
And if they're going to get rid of the pirates, they're going to have to be tougher than the pirates.
Yeah.
That's a considerable paradox because there is rough work to be done.
Mm.
You need some rough people, but you need them to be moral rough people.
Yeah.
So how do you have that combination of someone who can be rough when needed, but is also has moral commitments and is socially embedded in your community? So he has a stake in your community. It's one of your people. He's one of us. So I've worked.
You
my way
need
around.
someone who is capable, willing, and and probably on some degree enjoys caving in the face of the bad guy, but can be trusted with your daughter.
Yes, and your
How-
property.
How do you find that person?
And even can be trusted not to be unduly brutal to the bad guy.
Ah, so cave his face in, but only to a certain degree.
Only until he gives up.
Only okay.
No, and people can make fun of the efforts to develop just war rules, but that's what they all come down to.
Hmm.
The need to win. And there's a paradox here. If you insist, as you should insist, because war is an ugly thing. It is. Never been in it myself, thank God, but I know people who have. It's ugly.
Hmm.
Therefore, you have to insist. You only go to war when absolutely necessary. But here's the paradox. If it's really necessary, if it's truly necessary, that means it's really essential to win it.
Ah,
And in order to win it, you have to be good at it. And to be good at it, you have to have people who've practiced. And they're not going to practice unless at some level they like it.
Right.
It's a considerable paradox. It's an
very.
inescapable paradox.
Hmm.
So how do you create a structure in which people have warlike skills
Hmm.
and proclivities, and yet are servants of the people, servants of the common good, even servants of God?
Yeah.
The most famous effort to do this in history was surely chivalry. Was it completely successful? Clearly not. But
But it was an attempt.
a noble attempt. And it has had some permanent effects.
Hmm.
So that World War II, the US ambassador to Japan famously observed, it's a wonderful statement, Germany was an apostate from moral standards Japan never knew.
Hmm.
And it was onto something, because the Japanese samurai never had the same ethical commands.
Hmm.
He had, the ethical command of loyalty,
Hmm.
the ethical command of absolute loyalty and unflinching courage, but not the ethical command of sparing your enemy when he asks for mercy. Not the ethical command of taking care of the beggar,
Mhm.
of defending the widow. An ethical command observed in the breach, of course, as all ethical commands are. Does that mean you shouldn't have ethical commands? Because we are imperfect in fulfilling them, should we not have them? I think that's a horrible thought. So I'll say it was a noble effort, and has had a permanent effect. Still in our civilization, we have expectations for how we will behave at war. We fall short of them, sometimes in a massive way. But the expectations are there. And the fact that we fall short of them does not negate the value of those
having them, yeah.
expectations.
Hmm. Right. Okay. So for every American soldier that committed literal murder or rape in any conflict, Vietnam or what have you, we don't know about the ones who decided not to, but even for the ones who did, there's value in the fact that we thought those people should be called to account, which other cultures didn't even really have that structure to call those people into account. They weren't even seen as violating some code. Is that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Okay.
That there were accepted norms often violated, accepted norms of behavior that simply did not exist in the Japanese military. So again, that quote from the US ambassador in Japan at the time of the war, Germany was an apostate from moral standards Japan never knew. That the Japanese, in a sense, were less guilty in some of their atrocities because they did not they were not consciously rejecting standards that in principle, Germany, in principle, as a Christian nation for a long time,
Hmm.
in principle accepted.
Okay. So Gestapo soldiers rejected a centuries-old tradition that
Yeah.
a Japanese soldier just didn't have access
Didn't
to.
have access to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
when you read
That's right.
that Allied prisoners of war, the Japanese, had the same death rate that Soviet prisoners of the Germans did, which is
Mhm.
true. You
Mhm.
read that, but you're sadder. I mean, human misery is always sad, but you're sadder. It's more horrible that happened, that the Germans treated their Soviet prisoners that way,
Mm.
because the Germans had a heritage of Christianity behind them
Mm.
that was being deliberately rejected.
Yeah. So I want to back up for a minute. I mean, Tom, you can speak to this yourself. I look at the modern American church, which of course is what I have the most experience of.
That's all.
And I have international experiences that I think,
If you're going there, I better take another drink.
yeah, make it two.
There's
You know, and I just we're talking about very martial and masculine things, right? It appears to me, I think someone had a quip on Facebook one time that, you know, you can always tell a church is dying when the men in the pews don't sing, right? You know, they might be there, but they're not participating, right? In your opinion, Padre, what's missing from the typical American, particularly young men's, but all men on some level? You know, what is missing from our understanding of Christ himself, you know, as both a Messiah, but then also as a masculine figure? I'll go a little further. It appears to me that we repeat often in the American church in the 90s and early 2000s, when I was coming up through what teachings the American church had to offer, was, you know, let the little children come to me, right? Was there
very important?
Was there any real engagement with the text in which Christ forms a whip out of cords and drives the money changers from the temple? If there was, I never heard it. Right? Can you unpack this a little bit?
Well, to start with,
No.
it's an old problem.
Hmm.
Napoleon Bonaparte expressed an age-old view of what some people a bit prejudicially have called the classic Mediterranean male. When he talked about how women go to church and raise the kids and produce the food, and that men who are professional religious were not fully men. It's an old view. We've struggled with that for a long time. So it goes back, it's haunted us for longer than 80s and 90s. The American church, though, really felt that it had a handle on this problem. So the image of the American church, self-image to some degree, but also public image of the American church, public image as partly seen through old newsreels and old movies, but the public image of the American church in the mid-20th century was distinctly masculine.
We're talking 50s and 60s.
40s, 50s.
40s, 50s. Okay.
You know, so
going my way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unmistakably. Certainly a role for women, as someone remarked. If you went in America 75 years ago, the only places where women were routinely giving orders to men were Catholic schools and hospitals, where Mother Superior was in charge. And woe betide Dr. X if he defied Mother Superior. was. So certainly there was a place for women, a much greater place than is sometimes recognized. Again, 75 years ago, America, that Catholic schools and hospitals were the one place where women would routinely give orders to men.
Mm,
Nonetheless, the public image was unquestionably masculine and pretty comfortably so,
okay.
or so it seems.
Mm,
Certainly don't touch the public image, right? That's always a slippery thing, but you have to pay attention to it. Clearly, it's not the public image today. So
there's
yeah,
a Norman Rockwell painting of a mother with the son and two daughters going to Easter. It appears to be Easter Sunday services, right? And the father is hunched down in the lounge chair, smoking a cigarette and reading the paper, right? And Norman, and this I think was Rockwell's later period. So I'm going to think
Mhm.
50s
Mhm.
sometime, but it was this disengagement
Mm.
of the American father from the American church,
Mm.
Catholic or non-Catholic. So, but please, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's an old problem. I don't have notes in front of me, as I said. Gnawing in the back of my head. I also saw something once about Congregationalist New England, which had very strict standards for full membership in the church. I think I saw something about the disproportion between female and males who
Okay.
lived up to those rather exacting standards for
Mm,
full membership in the church. So it's an old problem. It's raised its head at different times.
okay.
So it's not unique to the American church
Okay.
of 80s, 90s, 2000s, nonetheless. I'm sorry, but I opened the door to popular culture
Mm,
again. If we move from 50s, early 80s, think about the image of the Catholic priest from going my way to MASH.
to match.
It's not a hostile image,
Mm,
but the priest in MASH
Mm.
is clearly an absurd figure.
ah,
He's kind of a likable absurd figure,
a likable goof.
a likable goof.
Mm,
He's clearly a likable goof.
yeah.
No, later on, you get much more hostile depictions. But for the most part, in popular culture, I'd say even now, not so much bitterly hostile as silly.
I don't know. I don't know. My observation of the culture at this point, quite frankly, is when I say the observation of the culture, I'm referring especially to stand-up comedy, which I think in some ways
You know much
reveals-
more about that than I do.
Yeah, which I think reveals the sentiment of the culture, because I think comedians can say what no one is too rude to say in other contexts.
You would know more about that than I do.
I think
certainly.
unfortunately since 2002, the immediate association of Catholic priest is to someone who prefers to have sex with children. I do believe that. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's the easy cartoon that people will go
Okay.
to.
That's a good way of putting it. Easy
Yeah.
cartoon.
Yeah.
Which is clearly much more hostile,
Oh, very much so.
and much more wicked. Well, and of course, that in some ways is one of the most spectacular own goals in all of history. Well, here we're getting to something. I'm going to connect back to the question of masculinity.
Hmm.
Because St. Paul gives very, if I can use the expression, virile directions to Timothy about how to deal with an erring presbyter.
Yeah.
Elder, presbyter, priest. St. Paul tells Timothy, accept no accusation against an elder unless supported by 2 or 3 witnesses. So due process, we would say, but those who are guilty rebuke publicly, that the rest may fear.
Mm.
Those are his words. It's very straightforward. If you got some people who are going to be severely tempted to bad behavior, one kind or another, some of them are so far gone that they're going to do it. Others, you might save them from behaving badly with a good dose of deterrence.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
Those who are guilty rebuke publicly that the rest may fear. Serious wrongdoing should have been dealt with in, dare I say it, a virile way, not just in that particularly awful area, but in other respects. Father, did you conduct an invalid baptism? Let me explain to you what the word suspension means. And then you'll get to experience it. This is outrageous that a baptism should be celebrated invalidly. So there are many forms of bad behavior other than that most notorious one. Gravely bad behavior should be gravely bad, right? People stumble, but gravely bad behavior should be dealt with in a strong enough way that it has a deterrent effect, which is why St. Paul writes, the prince does not bear the sword in vain. That doesn't necessarily mean literal capital punishment, although it doesn't exclude it clearly. That's what you do with a sword. But it does mean punishment, and a harsh enough punishment that some people will be kept from this wrongdoing just by the fear of the punishment. And that we fell from. People far wiser than I have written for decades about what's called the triumph of the therapeutic. So instead of dealing with
Sorry, just for the sake of our audience, can you repeat that phrase again?
triumph of the therapeutic.
The triumph of the therapeutic.
That we're not, instead of thinking of things in terms of crime and punishment, it's sickness. We're going to heal the sickness. I'm making fun of it, but to some degree, but it should be made fun of. No, there's an element of sickness, but there's also an element of choice.
Okay.
And if you deny the element of choice, in order to deny guilt, you have to deny choice. If you deny the element of choice, you are the dehumanizer. You are saying that this person is no longer enough of a human being to be able to choose. You can choose. You need some support in your choice, yes, but you can choose. And because you can choose, you need to face consequences of choosing badly.
So ultimately, the movement that says, people should not be really held as being culpable because they had addictive tendencies, they had pressures, they had this, they had that, the other thing, right? Ultimately, there's at the root of it, there's a sort of coddling, right? A dehumanizing coddling.
A dehumanizing coddling.
Yeah.
It's
similar to like, of course my dog gobbled up the sausage that spilled on the floor. He's a dog and it was on the floor, like what can we expect?
Well, he's a dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you treat people that way, you deny their agency, you deny their full humanity. So there's a paradox that punishment, the Lord chastises those whom he loves. That's a useful verse. Or from Proverbs, he hates his child who spares the rod. There is, and it doesn't necessarily mean, literally, although again, I think it necessarily excludes it, but it means if you care for the child or the adult, you will punish the crime appropriately, the punishment duly seasoned by mercy. What's the Shakespeare line? Earthly justice doth then show most likest heavens when mercy seasons justice. Justice needs that seasoning. The punishment needs to be seasoned with mercy, not taken away. And that does tie into that question of masculinity. Authority somehow came to be thought of in this odd mix of motherly and bureaucratic. Now, there's a repulsive combination. This odd mix of motherly and bureaucratic. Motherly, we want to make sure nobody gets hurt, and yet bureaucratic. On the other hand, make sure that Form 240C is properly filled out and filed in triplicate. I think authority in the church has always been influenced by authority outside the church, because the people who exercise authority in the church do come from a cultural context.
Right, of course. It's unavoidable.
It's unavoidable. So naturally, authority in the church in the 13th century was going to have knightly aristocratic overtones. Naturally, authority in the church in the 20th, 21st century is going to have bureaucratic overtones. It's our age is a
The worst overtones imaginable. Yeah.
I'd rather have
Yeah.
knightly aristocratic than bureaucratic. Nonetheless,
Bureaucratic
it's
overtones.
very important to fill out your prenuptial investigation questionnaire properly and legibly, and have it duly filed.
Yeah.
And
By the 15th.
and by the 15th, and make sure a copy of the file is kept in your parish, another copy sent to all this. And I shouldn't make fun of it. It's natural, to some degree necessary. I think because this is people's experience of so much of life, it's a little bit heartbreaking when they encounter this in the church.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
And I've heard people talk about that when they get into marriage prep. That the main emphasis seems to be on getting all the paperwork properly filled out and things duly stamped and duly sealed. But this combination of bureaucratic and motherly.
Well, can I pause you there?
Yeah.
I mean, would you be willing to substitute the word coddling instead of motherly in the sense that motherly in my mind means like the proper nurturing
Oh, I see
up
what you
into a
mean.
certain age, or coddling means
Right.
trying to apply mothering past the age.
An
that's appropriate.
an unwise mother.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So a wise mother will discipline the kids early on.
Right.
But most mothers I know there's a time when they have to bring in the father.
Was this your experience, Tom?
Yeah, always.
You probably had your day ruined. Was like when your father gets home.
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely.
So to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And unfortunately, that's not even the right word. It's more tragic than that. Catastrophically, in some cases, you're forgetting somebody's already been hurt.
Oh,
Somebody's already been hurt
right.
and seriously hurt. And that offense needs to be dealt with, even if it's dealt with in a way that causes hurt, if you will, to the offender. But that can be a salutary hurt, a healthy hurt, if the offense is proportionate, duly seasoned with duly seasoned with mercy, and has a sense of hope. You know, that is true for clerical misbehavior, but it's also true for law and order and dealing with criminal behavior. You do the offender no real favor, and you do society positive damage, and you insult the victim. If your approach to the criminal is, oh,
you were forced to do this because of your background.
Do this. We feel so sorry for you. We don't want to hurt you. Somebody's already been hurt. That has to be recognized, and that hurt has to be, if you will, vindicated. I don't say avenged, but don't toss that idea out too quickly. Part of justice is recognizing that there is a vindication for an offense. They don't just get away with it.
I think a lot of American men that I know are struggling for ways to feel that their Christianity or their Catholicism, for those in the Catholic Church, is really expressed in a masculine way, or they want a way to know that, okay, I want to be Christian, or I want to be Catholic, as the case may be. But what are my options? I can go to church, and I sort of sit there in the pew relatively passively. There's a men's group that will meet for Bible study, and that's good as so far as it goes. Or there's a men's group that will put on a pancake breakfast every month, right? By contrast, I remember visiting this church that very, very conservative in certain ways. But the men's group there had a former Marine who was teaching them how to defend a crowd of churchgoers in the event of an active shooter or other disturbance. And this particular parish It was down in Denver. So, you know, a city large enough that an active shooter situation is not out of the picture.
It's not on a picture anywhere.
Yeah.
There's a famous line from Sherlock Holmes where Watson talks about the peaceful countryside. Holmes makes a comment about how there's an equal proportion of perversity and evil in the countryside as there is in the city. There are just fewer people.
Right.
So you're gonna have less
right.
concentration of it, but
It's right. It's harder to find because there's fewer people. I just look at the, and this was sort of my question a moment ago, but I look at the state of the church, you know, Christian and Catholic, you know, and I see a lot of men who they're just drawing a complete blank when it comes to how do I match masculinity to my faith. You know, my wife tells me I should go to church, and I've got these other guys in my life who invite me to Bible study, and those are good, I suppose, but I don't feel like I'm doing anything. It's important to so many guys.
doing something. No, that has been an important part of the recipe for successful work with women too.
Okay.
I think especially with men, yes, they are. I remember once early in my priesthood, was at a parish of the Catholic school, was at a meeting of the Parents Association. And the Parents Association, during part of the meeting, they were discussing some issue of curriculum. And yeah, it was very noticeable that the women were dominating that discussion, and most of the men there were just waiting for it to be over. Although I was very interested in the curriculum discussion, but next order of business dealt with some repairs in the school building. Well, then the men perked up. Because that's concrete. We're doing something. I think there is a difference there.
Okay.
No, lots of men like myself, we're not handyman by any means. It's a dangerous thing to give me a hammer.
You'll do more damage than good. Yeah.
Matter of fact, it's distinctly possible. Think of an elder couple I know. The man, rest his soul, he's passed away. We don't want to deal with that crude a stereotype, but yes, part of the recipe involving men is giving them providing some fairly concrete tasks.
Concrete. Okay.
Concrete.
Yeah.
Sometimes literally concrete.
Yeah.
Do X, and X being something that I know when it's actually been done.
Right. There is a new driveway in front of the religious education building.
Exactly.
That I know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. But forgive me. I will move on to another topic
I do a
here.
lot of forgiving.
Yeah, but you know, I do think that a lot people want to know, you know, where is the violence of Christ, right? I mean, we see this brief anecdote in the Gospels of him driving out the money changers, and he says he comes to set fire to the earth. And it seems to me, in addition, that he is determined to do violence to our sinfulness, that, you know, that he will wrest our souls from Satan. But then, you know, then he walks up Calvary. You know, he allows himself to be nailed to a cross. You know, and you know, he is in the mode of the martyr, of the slaughtered lamb. How do you parse all that out?
Oh,
Question.
Yeah, I know.
scriptural meekness.
Very
interesting. Book of Exodus describes Moses as the meekest of men. Wait a minute. This meekest of men is guilty of manslaughter early in his life. Killed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And then he wanders into the desert. He sees some shepherds who are being obnoxious to some women, and this is how he meets his wife. he deals with those shepherds.
Mm-hmm.
And he later on, once he hears his call from God, quite a bit of time has passed, goes into Egypt, and God is to push him some to do it, partly because Moses stutters and he's very embarrassed about that.
Mm.
But he finally does it, confronts Pharaoh very directly,
Mm.
and he confronts the Israelites when they fall very directly. Indeed, the meekest of men is startlingly direct with God in his prayers.
Mm.
Uh,
He withstood God in the breach.
Withstood God in the breach. God, we would say to test him, said, I'm done with these people. I'm done with them. I'm going to start over again. And I'll start from you.
Right.
No, don't do that.
Mm.
Moses says, yeah. So this meekest of men, oh my, does these things. So evidently scriptural meek is not our meek.
We've corrupted meek.
We've corrupted meek.
Yeah.
And we see this very
We
definitely.
need to make meek great.
Yeah, that's right. MMA.
Yeah.
MMMA, make meek. MMGA.
Yeah. A meme guy, you know.
Meme guy.
Make meek
That's
great again.
very
Yeah.
awkward.
Yeah. We're gonna have to work on that.
And the Lord in the Gospels, one of the reasons that people are mad enough to kill him is that he has not been meek. He's been quite confrontational, Whitened sepulchres, all fine outside, but full of filth and dead men's bones within. Well, this is confrontational language. So yes, they're mad enough to kill him because he has not been particularly meek. Or as the congregation Capernaum says, what is this, a new teaching? He teaches with authority. And not as one of the scribes. There is in him, in his teaching, there's in my opinion, I think that, well, personally, no, I say, and you can accept or not accept it, but this is what I say. And yet goes meekly as a lamb to a slaughter. So evidently scriptural meek is different from our standard idea of meek. And it comes down to this. Meek in the Bible is obedient to God and compassionate to his people. Moses is very forceful with the Israelites. Sometimes he orders executions, as a matter of fact. He's very forceful with the Israelites. And yet, when God says, I'm done with them, Moses says, no. Give us another chance. Give them another chance. We'll try this again.
Right.
So
what a scandal would be if the enemies of your people
exactly
he brought them out to the desert just to slaughter them.
Exactly.
Right.
So obedient to God.
Moses, the first man to think about the optics. You know what I mean? What are the optics of this?
Use that argument with God, no less.
Yeah.
Obedient to God and compassionate to his people. This compassion to his people, it should be said, must be said, implies clarity. Or as Jesus said, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. The immediate context is talking about oaths, but I think that extends to, there's something for people like me to remember who, in case you didn't notice, like talking, it's good for us to remember that we should not so decorate what we have to say that people can miss the main point. And we shouldn't try to cushion the main point so much that it gets lost in the cushioning.
Yeah.
Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Meekness does not exclude being direct. It means obedient to God, compassion to his people. Sometimes that compassion to his people is, this is what you need to hear. It
as
is
uncomfortable as it may be.
You're not going to like it, but you need to hear it.
Yeah.
My doctor in teenage years, some people thought he had a horrible bedside manner. So when I was a senior in high school, I came down with nasty food poisoning. I think I picked it up at a New Year's party, and I think I know whose food was to blame. But anyway, being a senior in high school, I thought I would tough it out, but oh my, it was bad. It was bad. So called the doctor. And I said, help. I was dehydrating rapidly. Prescribed something. And I said, well, doc, is it going to help? And he said, yes, it should. And this time I was slightly freaking out. What if it doesn't? I said, well, that's easy. You die. Yes mean yes,
Yeah.
maybe no mean no.
Right.
You're not going to like to hear that if you don't take care of this,
Mm,
you could be a corpse,
right.
but you need to hear that you need to take care of this.
Right. Something needs to motivate you.
Yes.
Right.
So meekness does not exclude clarity. What meekness does is enjoin compassion. Compassion is clear. Yeah, compassion embraces clarity,
Mm,
even when the clarity might not be immediately welcome.
mm. Right, right. No, I'm reminded of an incident in high school when a teacher, I may have shared this with you, Tom, when a teacher handed me back an essay and he had given me some, some failing grade on it, D minus or F, or
Inconceivable.
yeah, right. And so I went to him and I was like, to put it briefly, what's the deal, man? And he's like, yeah, especially because he hadn't really marked up the paper itself. He had just slapped, this is failing grade on it. So there was no real grammatical errors to speak of. Because I mean, all my life I've been a fairly good writer. But he said to me, he's like, you need what Hemingway prescribed for every writer,
Ooh.
and you don't have it. And that's an onboard bullshit detector.
Well, I never heard that before. Well, that's good. That's good.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it is stuck with me. It's stuck with me to this day. And that, so almost 20 years now.
Well, that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Oh no. And to be honest, it was, senior year, yeah, philosophy in the modern world. Can I name the professor? I promise you I can't. But I remember his lesson, so shout out to yeah.
To the
Yeah.
unknown
Yeah.
professor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Spring
One of our
to-
universities should have the tomb of the unknown professor.
Yeah, the tomb of the unknown
Oh,
professor.
You should, yeah.
People would be burning papers there every spring. Just there's this mound, this pyre. You did this to me. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I just remember at the time being frankly embarrassed, that someone had so thoroughly seen through me. And through my writing, which everyone else, up to that time had generally praised, but for him to see that this 17-year-old was making claims that not only did he not know if they were true, this 17-year-old hadn't even examined whether or not he believed them, but had nonetheless put them down on paper and sort of bestowed them upon the world to suffer through his prose, right?
That's very good.
Yeah, no, to this day, again, thank you to the unknown professor.
I know someone who was worked for a while as a theatrical agent. It's an interesting line of work.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about one of the truly depressing things. He didn't stay with that work. The truly depressing things was these hopeful young people wanted to make it as an actor or a singer, didn't have what it takes.
Mm.
And there wasn't anyone to say to them,
Sorry, kid.
that's hard to hear.
Mm.
But if it's true,
Mm.
it's what they need to hear.
Right.
That is the compassionate thing, instead of stringing them along.
Mm. Right.
To something that's not going to end well.
Right. Right. Do you really want them to take another 2 years of their life to discover that
Exactly.
they don't have it,
Exactly.
whatever
So,
it is?
Meekness, obedience to God, compassion to his people, but compassion can be, and I think must be, true compassion must be clear.
Mm. Compassion must be a servant of the truth.
Servant of the truth.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
servant of the truth and servant of that person
Mm.
for your good, not for my sake. I'm not because I want to control you,
Mm.
which is an awful thing. And sometimes the desire for control can be operative in people offering good advice.
Mm.
Here's one of the reasons why Tolkien's elves don't often offer advice.
Mm.
Is aware of that. I will say this: someone genuinely meek doesn't give a lot of direction. That much is true.
Mm.
Doesn't give a lot of direction, doesn't give a lot of advice. When they do, it's clear. They don't give a lot. There's so much that we don't know. Someone asked me, what should I do? I know a little bit of your situation, but only a little bit.
Mm.
I'm reticent to try to give advice. However, where something is clear, yeah, don't steal a car. Where something is
Don't
clear.
steal a car, go to elope with your girlfriend,
Yeah.
and go start a cult down in Ecuador.
Right.
Yeah.
That I can say,
Yeah.
gotta go.
Meekness, I think, genuinely does include. I'll say, James says, I would be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Quick to hear, slow to speak. Meekness embraces a genuine caution about telling people what they should do.
Mm.
But you don't say never about that. Sometimes people need to hear.
Mm.
Need to hear. Don't do that.
Well, that's one of the
Or
marks.
do this.
I mean, that's one of the marks of predatory marketing and cults, right? Is that, I mean, predatory marketing and cults will both tell you, I have the answer for you.
Yes, that's.
I know nothing about you, but I have the answer for you, right? And there's a certain attraction to that.
There
Right?
is.
We all want.
Yeah, but that's the opposite version of taking away people's agency.
Mm.
So the one version we talked about earlier is when you deny that they're culpable or guilty.
Mm.
They didn't, it's not their fault that they
Mm.
beat someone's head in. Society this, society that, the drugs they had, whatever. No, they have agency. They made decisions. You take away their agency, you dehumanize them. But another way of doing that is when you prescribe someone's life for them.
Mm.
This is what you're going to do.
Mm.
This is going to be your career.
Mm.
This is how you're going to spend your day. These are the books you're going to read. These are the thoughts you're going to have. Well, seriously,
Oh yeah.
people do that.
Oh, we've met
Yeah.
that. We've met those people.
You met
Yes.
Yeah.
That's another way, dehumanizing way of taking away people's
Oh.
agency,
Mm.
their human agency.
Mm.
So meekness, compassion for God's people, it means, again, obedience to God, compassion for God's people. That compassion means respecting them. You don't try to take over their lives, but when you see disaster on the horizon,
Mm.
you speak
Mm.
and clearly.
Wise words.
Definitely the best explanation I've ever heard for meekness.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the modern interpretation is like, it's terrible. It's like back away and don't try to get involved. I think the understanding of meekness now, it's kind of like the hands-off approach. I don't want to mess with your life. You can figure it out.
Mm.
But I mean, completely off the rails of what it should be in a definition.
Well, there's an element up there. There's an
Yeah.
element, right? It's like
Right.
I can't be overly involved because I don't know your life
Right.
fully, and even if I did know your life fully, it's still not mine, right? So there's an element.
It's still your life.
But
Yeah.
it's still your life.
Yeah.
But where it runs afoul is to think that even the truth, that I am not a servant of the truth at any time.
Right.
Mm.
And here we come to the message of the church. And again, you grew up with this.
Mm.
And I grew up with it. It's been around for a while, where some people in the church, including some leaders, think it's very wise to say something like, well, we don't really have any answers. We're all searching together. Who wants to do? Why am I here?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If
And
you have
want
nothing to
right,
offer.
and you want me to tithe to
Yes.
that? Yeah.
I don't
No,
know about this.
what we have to say is we don't have all the answers, but we have some. Not only do we have some, we have the ones that matter the most.
Mm.
Mm.
I can't tell you what career you need to have.
Mm.
but I can tell you the kind of human being you need to be,
Hmm.
because that's been revealed by God.
Hmm.
I can tell you how to have eternal life. I can tell you that your life has meaning, to steal Bishop Sheen's famous phrase, that your life is worth living.
Hmm.
I can tell you this, we have some answers. And if we don't have some answers, we aren't worth warm spit. Might as well fold up and go away. You know, I've been so angry since I was youthful, hearing people who are supposed to be leaders in the church. I've heard it. I've heard it. You probably have too. We don't have answers. We're just searching together.
We
Well,
invite you to come and search with us.
with us. Yeah. No. We have some answers. Otherwise, not only why are we here, but is God just performing some sort of switch and bait with us?
Bait and
Bait and
switch,
switch?
yeah.
Hmm.
He has given us a definite revelation, ultimately through his son.
Hmm.
This revelation does have some definite content. It is not the explanation of all things in heaven and on earth that has not been given to us. There are many things that are not answered. The Lord makes a point of not answering some questions, at least not as people meant them.
Hmm.
Lord, are there few who will be saved? And he doesn't say, oh, don't worry about that. Everyone's going to go to heaven.
Hmm.
Sorry, from Balthazar. He doesn't say that. He also doesn't say, oh, only a few. Most are going to go to hell. Doesn't say that either. No. What he says is, shh, many or few saved. That's not your business. You strive to enter through the narrow gate. You follow my teachings. That's what it is to go through the narrow gate. You follow my teachings. Many saved, few saved. That's my business.
Hmm.
It's not your business.
Hmm.
Your business. You go through the narrow gate.
So yeah, the great scandal of the silence of Christ, right?
About
That
many subjects.
about many subjects.
And therefore it must be the silence.
Lord, there are people who invite him to judge between me and my brother. Yes.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
yes. To come judge this. It would appear from the context that some earthly dispute.
Inheritance, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, inheritance.
Mhm.
Just between me and my brother. I said, no, that's not why I'm here. The Lord does not answer all questions. The scriptures don't answer all questions. The church cannot claim to answer all questions. That's the element of truth in us saying, and this was one of the things that was talked about in the Second Vatican Council era, stepping back from triumphalism. We can't claim to have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. It's stupid of us to pretend to, but we have some. We have something to offer, and we think you'll be better off if you hear it.
Hmm.
So come and listen. We've got something to say. It's not going to answer all your questions. In particular, I think it's so crucial. When I was in Brazil for World Youth Day, the World Youth Day almost killed me.
Yeah.
Yes, I was coughing my lungs out on a back street in Rio de Janeiro.
This is it.
In between a porta potty and a gigantic trash bin. So this was probably the maximum miserable I had been. But while I was there, talked to a youngish Brazilian priest, younger than me, talked to a youngish Brazilian priest, and he said, you know what, when I grew up, he said, when I grew up in Brazil, the word was, if you wanted to start a labor union, talk to a Catholic priest. If you want to hear about Jesus Christ, find a Protestant minister. There was this conviction that the church needed to provide the answers to these worldly problems. Now, we can't be indifferent to worldly problems. We are not told how to conduct a government. We talked about that earlier. The Gospels and epistles don't give us directions.
There's no roadmap.
There's no roadmap about
No.
how Christians are to be in running government. We don't know how to organize a government. We're not given that. We're not told how to organize a society. We're not given that. We're told some basic principles
Mhm.
of human decency and goodness. and responsibility to God that should underlie however we organize the government
Mm.
and however we organize society. But we need to be clear again. That's part of meekness, and I dare say part of manliness. We need to be clear about what our mission is and what it isn't. We can't be indifferent to things like labor unions and just wages and social conditions and law and order, but our business, what did Jesus say? Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and these other things will be given you besides. Our business is to point out the kingdom of heaven.
Mm.
That vision of the kingdom of heaven has consequences for how we do things on earth,
Mm.
but our business, kingdom of heaven.
Mm.
Personally, and I know this may sound a bit too critical, but I get disturbed sometimes when bishops or groups of bishops will immediately issue statements about proposed legislation on this or that subject. It's not that we don't have anything to say about the legislation, but I go back to this: we should be reticent, like Tolkien's elves.
And we are watchers first.
We are watchers first.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know all the details, and all the details are not necessarily our business. Public policy, prudential decisions, as priests and as bishops, it's not our business. Basic moral principles and orientation towards God and the service of God's people, reminding people of that. That's our business. But I think we should be reticent. Again, avoiding triumphalism in either its left or right forms.
Triumphalism, just for the sake of for our listeners, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is this sense that somehow in the church militant, right, that those on earth will somehow experience the glory of heaven in some sort of utopian manifestation.
Right. Triumphalism is, if everyone were Catholic, everything would be great. No. As the history of Catholic countries illustrates. I like medieval history. Most medieval countries, almost everybody was Catholic. Things are not always great.
The 100 Years' War.
There's 100 Years' War, for example. Yeah, triumphalism is that fairly naive notion that if
so it's a form of utopianism.
Heaven is not going to be established on earth. Does it mean heaven is indifferent to what happens on earth? Far from it. Nonetheless, our business is the kingdom of heaven. That's what you said. Lord, I will follow you. First, let me bury my father and mother. That sounds like a big thing. The dead bury their dead. You proclaim the kingdom of God. There are earthly things that need to be done, but particularly as collar, funny thing, the collar, by the way. It's an odd little tongue depressor. So anyway, our business is proclaiming the kingdom of God.
Well, and so that strikes me as something that I've long wanted to ask you about. You've repeatedly mentioned to me that your mission is to proclaim Christ.
Yes.
Which I think everyone with a Christian background would be like, yeah. But then you always add, which I've not heard from other preachers, and him crucified, right? My mission is to proclaim Christ and him crucified.
That's St. Paul.
Can you unpack that a little bit? I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with it.
Yeah.
It's purely scriptural, St. Paul.
The
Jews seek signs, the Greeks demand wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. Stumbling block to Jews, stupidity to Greeks. Christ, the power of God, the wisdom and power of God, has to be specifically Christ crucified, and that's the cure to triumphalism. He did not establish an earthly kingdom. On earth, he was crucified. Offered himself up. His whole life, everything he had, offered himself up for the salvation of the world, to open the way to eternal life through his resurrection. Christ crucified is saying, although again, as we said earlier, as soon as we had lots of Christians, we did have to face the question of how are Christians supposed to organize?
Right.
How they participate in political life, social life, military life, legal life? How are Christians to participate? Nonetheless, we are not here to construct a perfect society. We are not here to construct paradise on earth. We are not here to make the whole world Christian, even. Wonderful if they come to the gospel. We are here to proclaim it. Put the word out, invite them to come, cast the seed, toss the seed. What they do with the seed, that's on them, though. We're not to compel, but also there's another temptation besides compelling. This temptation is posing, well, let's not talk about this part of our message because that could be bad advertising,
Yeah.
bad optics.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Right. What are the optics?
We want to make sure they
of
come in.
Forgive thy enemy.
No, it doesn't mean we can't have a certain prudence about what we put first in front of people.
Right.
Nonetheless, our business is to proclaim Christ crucified, which means we must be prepared for rejection.
Okay.
And if we do not experience rejection, we're not proclaiming Christ crucified.
We're probably not laying it on thick enough.
We're not presenting it clearly enough. The whole message.
Okay.
The whole gospel message is a slap in the face of this world, far beyond how to organize an economic or social system. It is a huge slap in the face to say, it's easier for a camel to pass a needle's eye than for a rich man to get into heaven.
Yeah.
Or Our Lady's words in the Magnificat. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. There is boiling hot water in the Gospels. That is a huge challenge and shock to any social system, any political system. And we have to put that whole message out there, fully aware that there are parts of it. Jesus talks about eating my flesh and drinking my blood, chapter 6 of John. And how do some people react? No. We didn't sign on for this. And they leave. And Jesus doesn't say, well, no, come back, let me explain. No. If you stay, you'll see what I mean. But I'm not going to try to lull you into staying. You decide if you want to hear. There's going to be rejection. And we must. What is he says this? Woe to you when all men speak well of you. Their ancestors treated the false prophets in this way. There will be, if you're a follower of Christ, he's perfectly direct about this. Take up your cross and follow me. He's extremely direct about it in St. John's Gospel. You will have trouble in this world. Be of good hope. I have overcome the world. Is going to be a cross. And we can't shy away from that.
Okay.
And in particular, our civilization has a terrible time with this, so it's obviously true. You know what? You're going to die. Who dares say that?
You think our civilization
Oh,
has
yeah.
a harder time with this than people even 100 years ago?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's how we do.
Where did that, sorry to just
Yeah.
bit of a sidebar. Where did that spring from? I mean, was there something that happened after the Second World War that?
Well, it's partly the other side of the coin is something very good.
Mm-hmm.
So for earlier ages, I don't know quite how to put this, people dropping like flies. You had
There was this inevitability to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the time you were an adult, you knew plenty of people had died. Siblings, possibly your parents. So part of it's the other side of the coin of something good.
That we have held death at bay.
Yes.
In a way that's never been dreamed of.
Exactly.
In 10,000 years.
Paradoxically, that makes us a little more scared of it.
Okay.
We are more scared of it.
Okay. So, yeah, it's interesting. So Robert Bolt writes Thomas More as saying that death has always stood just a little bit to the side, always asking if this is not the hour, right? Perhaps, so is it true for me to imagine that in earlier civilizations, we always imagined that death was just essentially around the corner?
Absolutely, unquestionably.
Whereas our culture, we always have this image of death, like death comes. He was distant, and now he comes to us, right?
And he was not distant.
He was not distant.
Yes. So if you grow up in most of human history,
Hmm.
where 40, 50% of children die before adulthood.
Hmm.
Well, if you grow up in that world,
Hmm.
which is most of human race for
Hmm.
most of its history, death is not distant. It's
You either knew someone or were someone who had seen their best friend die.
exactly sibling, parent,
Hmm.
still a struggle,
Mm-hmm.
still a mystery, still an enemy. The last enemy to be destroyed is death, says St. Paul, still an enemy, but a familiar enemy.
Ah.
So paradoxically, our very success, which of course I do not regret, right?
Hmm.
You know, here I am. I am 59. In most of human history, odds are I'd be dead a decade.
Hmm.
If I survived childhood and the childhood diseases, I'd be dead a decade. So I'm not regretting it, right?
No.
But paradoxically, our very success in keeping death at bay has made us more afraid of it.
Hmm.
It's unfamiliar, and that makes it more horrible.
Ah.
So, professionally, with funerals, people are, even compared to 25 years ago, people are much more reticent about having an open coffin at the vigil. I don't want to see a dead body.
Ah.
Why? It's the uncomfortable thought that's going to be me. It's true. We don't want to think
But it's this sort of, yeah, it's this sanitized truth, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know someday, maybe someday, but it'll be after I have that vacation home on the coast of Maine. Right. Surely my vacation home on the coast of Maine will happen before the whole coffin bit.
Well, and even our very language, we don't say he's dead. He's passed away.
Hmm. He's passed on.
Passed on. A young monk who once said that is before he was ordained. I don't imagine he actually did this, but he once said he kind of hoped that at his first sermon he could have a skull on the pulpit. So as to say, this is what we are about. It's not that simple, but we preach Christ crucified. He embraced our humanity fully, and that meant mortality. You and I are not fully human until we've embraced our mortality. And it's through that embrace of mortality, that cross, that we pass to the resurrection. Doesn't mean we have to run, but doesn't mean we shouldn't run from it.
Right.
The Lord could have, he said this when St. Peter drew his sword, put your sword in its sheath. Do you not suppose that I could ask, do you not think that I could ask my Father for 7 legions of angels? He would send them, but no. Or as he said in the Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, but yours be done.
Right.
That meant his embrace of mortality. Which remains a puzzle. And yet, what do the elves, Tolkien's elves, call mortality? The gift of men.
The great rest.
Yeah. And the Christian revelation shows beyond a rest, far more than a rest. It is the gateway to sharing in divine life. But that crosses the gateway. So we preach Christ crucified.
Okay.
That's one of the glories of Catholic churches. Occasionally, some people ask, don't you believe in the resurrection? Why do you have the figure of a crucified Christ? And particularly when it's a Bible believing person, I can cite that passage from St. Paul. We preach Christ crucified. And we preach him in a very visual, direct way. You might call it an in-your-face kind of way. But it needs to be in our face.
Because it's the very thing that we would choose not to be in our face.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right, right. Everyone's a fan of the resurrection. Yeah. Who wants to hear about Christ
Everyone's a
crucified?
fan of Christmas.
Everyone's a fan of Christmas.
Resurrection is kind of mystical,
Hmm.
but even more mystical is Good Friday.
Ah, yep, yep.
This is a victory.
Right, right. Yeah, the silent victory.
Yes, that's what St. Paul proclaims, though. We preach Christ crucified.
Hmm. Yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, something about some of the troubles, that the church is facing today. Father's like, why would you be remiss? Do we have to bring them up?
Calls for whiskey rather than port.
Yeah. Port is sweet, whereas whiskey burns. Just like, yeah. What is the layman's? Can you offer some wisdom to the layman about how to navigate some of the particularly liturgical debates that have been, I think, plaguing the church for 15 years. I mean, my own experience, I don't know about yours, Tom, but I mean, growing up, I mean, I saw,
youngest one here. What's your perspective on that? Has it been your whole life hearing these liturgical battles?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I kind of gotten, I don't know if immune is the right word, but like it seems like they always continue, but nothing is ever really resolved.
Yes.
So I guess to me, it's like I'll just keep going to church and trying my best to live what I think is the Catholic faith based on what I've been told by the pastors or the priests. And then if something large develops, then go with that. But like I guess Pope Benedict's revamp of the missal, like makes sense. But then some people are to this say like the Norvis Ordo is not a valid mass.
Mhm.
And then to that it seems like, well, that
Well, that
seems
has
like
to be rejected.
yeah, like that's a pretty big deal. Like you're pretty much saying millions of people aren't going to mass every Sunday. So to me, it's like, well, I think just keep doing what you think is the best and in your situation. If you can go to Latin Mass, then that's fine. But, don't condemn everyone else that's going to Norvis Ordo just because you think is the right way. It seems kind of Protestant almost, like they're trying to be more authentically Catholic.
Yeah, no.
So yeah.
We have. This calls for careful handling.
Do we have to hit mute on anything?
We have stumbled into. We didn't plan to, but now we're into it and we have no idea how to get out of it. I will say this, and here I am going out on a limb a little bit, but the way out of this is not a blizzard of forceful decrees from Rome. It's a more complex and delicate situation than that. We've stumbled into a situation where we are like, in a way, very real way, we're like the Anglican communion of the 19th and 20th centuries. We have high church, broad church, and low church elements, as well as evangelicals and modernists. The Roman Catholic Church is not nearly as united on matters across the board, including liturgical, as it was in former times.
Okay.
This is not going to change anytime soon. And it's not going to change through brute force.
Okay.
It's not going to change because Francis is Pope. It's not going to change if some sort of fantasy anti-Francis is Pope. For the foreseeable future belongs to God. For the foreseeable future, we're going to have to live with high church, broad church, low church elements in the Catholic communion. Now, talking about the Anglican situation, the 20th century, C.S. Lewis, in the course of Screwtape Letters, has a passage where the tempter remarks, again, I don't have notes in front of me, but the tempter remarks something to the effect of, the real danger was this could have become a positive hotbed of charity. Instead, it's become a delightful source of division and hatred.
Mm.
Because we're going to have this high church, broad church, low church situation for the foreseeable future, we must resolve to let this become an opportunity to exercise charity.
Mm.
There are some minimum requirements for a basic unity. So we have the official liturgical texts,
Mm-hmm.
but apart from those minimum elements, resolve, always with the help of God's grace, resolve to give every benefit of the doubt, and resolve when you're traveling to do as the people you're worshiping with do.
Mm.
Again, unless it's something that's clearly a violation, but clearly a violation.
Ah.
I mean, clearly.
Mm.
Otherwise, resolve when you're traveling with the community to worship as they do. It might be irritating. I get irritated by an awful lot of music.
Mm.
By the way, not as bad as one of my brothers. He was at a particular place and the music was awful, as it often is. The music was awful. And John was grumbling about it. And the friend he was with said, "Oh, give him a break, John. It's for God." And John said, "Oh, crap is fine for God."
That's
Right.
a good comeback.
Yeah.
That's my brother. Anyway, do what they're doing, as long as it's not an obvious violation. That is an act of charity.
Mm.
We must not just live with liturgical differences. I think for the foreseeable future, we must embrace liturgical differences.
Mm.
And this means, in my view, it does mean finding a respectful space for people who are devotees of the older liturgy, finding a respectful place for them. My own opinion, but I will say this because I think this is meek in the sense of compassionate for God's people. In some places, their implementation of certain Roman directives has been unduly harsh.
Mm.
And I think that even those Roman directives will need to be revisited at some stage, not in the spirit of what Pope Francis calls backwardism, but in the spirit, if I can say this respectfully, I do not think, if I can say this respectfully, I do not think he quite grasps the on the ground reality that, at least for the foreseeable future, the outcome of the Vatican II reforms is existence of liturgical parties in the church, as with the Anglican Church, 19th, 20th centuries, high church, low church, broad church. That's not going to change anytime soon. Not going to be changed by decrees one way or the other. I think some bounds can be set, but it's something not just we have to live with it. Can we embrace it? Can we embrace these liturgical differences as can we embrace these as a way of respecting, of loving our brothers and sisters in Christ? If they receive communion in the hand, and they believe that in doing so, they're being reverent and worshipful, don't tell them they're doing something awful. If they want to discuss it, you can discuss it, but don't go, "Oh, this is sinful." If this person wants to kneel at communion, he believes that this is the way he will show reverence to the Lord, okay. As long as it's not causing him to trip over him. And risk a lawsuit. We can't have lawsuits as long as he's not risking anyone tripping over him. Embrace him as a brother in Christ.
There's this human
charity-
instinct towards tribalism about these.
Oh, oh, oh,
Another sip of port. Yeah.
tremendous.
New drinking game. Every time we mention something tribal,
That's right.
you got to drink
Every
port.
time you say the word liturgy, I have another shot.
Yeah. That would solve many liturgical
That was
debates.
my worst liturgical experience of my whole life, by the way. Ooh, in college. Mid-80s, National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops was having a big meeting. At this meeting, they were going to issue a statement about war and peace. So there was a big press buildup, and everybody expected a huge congregation.
What year was this?
Mid-80s. I was in college, Catholic University of America, National Shrine next door. U.S. Bishops had their final mass. I was one of the altar servers, very devout college student. U.S. bishops, they thought a huge crowd would come, but there was people weren't all that. This can be said respectfully. People are not nearly as interested in statements by the U.S. Council, by the U.S. Catholic bishops, as the U.S. Catholic bishops seem to think they are. So there's much less popular interest than they supposed. And there was a snowstorm. Now, we in Wyoming would not call it a snowstorm, but this is DC.
Right, by
By
DC
the-
standards.
There was, in fact, some snow.
Mm.
So the existence of some snow in those days, they were having discussions about whether DC could survive, whether DC could function in the aftermath of nuclear war. I thought to myself, it barely functions in the aftermath of snowfall. Anyway, very few people came. Okay. Community of both forms. They thought there were going to be thousands of people. There were not. None of the deacons, none of the masters of ceremony, none of the bishops thought to themselves, oh, we don't need to consecrate all this wine. But all the wine was brought to the altar, all the bishops prayed, all that wine was consecrated. And as you know from proper Catholic theology, after the consecration, although the substance is our Lord, body and blood, soul and divinity, all the natural properties of wine remain.
Right.
After this great big mass with very few people in attendance, like 250 bishops around the altar and 250 people in the congregation. After this, everybody leaves, the bishops leave, the deacons leave. Who has to consume vast amounts of the most holy sacrament in the form of wine? The unfortunate altar servers, who must do so reverently, because of course this is the most blessed sacrament in the form of wine, yet having its natural effects. This is why, ever since then, I have become opposed to community of both forms at huge masses.
Yes.
Thousands of people, just bring the hosts. But anyway,
Right.
yeah, it's liturgical arguments. They get very tiresome. No one's going to win the argument. I'm serious about that.
Right.
No one's going to win the argument at this point. The arguments on both sides, and they can talk early church this, early church that, Galatian sacramentary, anaphora of Ada and Mari. Bah! No one's going to win the argument at this point. It's not going to be resolved by argument. It's not going to be resolved by decree. We do have to have some bounds
Mhm.
set by lawful authority. The only way forward is charity. And that involves some crucifixion. Putting up with some things. You don't like so-and-so kneeling, live with it. Offer it up even. You don't like so-and-so receiving in the hand. Live with it. Offer it up even. Only charity. And that's a long road. 50 years, 100 years. But only charity will get us through this.
Okay, there won't be some pope, there won't be some council that will sort of resolve all of this, and then everyone will be like, oh, that's what we've been looking for this whole time.
No.
Yeah, no.
Directly. One of the things one of the things I learned as I studied church history, and this is going to sound awful, so it will need to be explained, but I'll put it out there, councils are overrated.
Oh.
What I mean is, superficially, councils look like they solve problems. No. They dealt with particular issues,
Hmm.
but always the way they dealt with those particular issues produced other problems.
Hmm.
So to think that I definitely don't want to get into this, but it can be said, we all know this, right? Let's not pretend. Many problems have flowed from the Second Vatican Council. That's not to say the council was bad, just to be matter of fact, we've got a lot of problems.
Hmm.
Just be matter of fact about that. And then there's a totally different discussion, who did what and should have done what and didn't do what. That just for now, just face that.
Yep.
To think that the way to deal with the problems that flow from a council is to have another council, no, it does not work that well. It's a little bit like how poor Emperor Justinian thought that the way to solve all the problems that flowed from the Council of Chalcedon was to have the Second Council of Constantinople, which is one of the great failures in church history. No. Councils are not this magic wand. I hereby declare an ecumenical council by the authority of St. Peter, and all problems will be solved. Amen. No.
Well, I mean, this is reflected in the sentiment, and I do think it was. I do think it was popular in the 90s to say if we could just get everyone together in a room and have them talk,
No, they kill each other.
they would all discover how much they have in common.
No.
It's like we've gotten to people together in a room and have, and a year later they were bombing each other. Right.
It's usually deeply held differences and arguments defended by intelligent, educated people on both sides, deeply entrenched. I am repeating myself. It's beyond arguing them out of it.
No.
On either side.
Well, as I said to Julian the other day, I was like, you have to remember, educated people are often insulated against evidence, you know?
And not just that, but also the evidence is startlingly ambiguous. So to take one hot button issue, in the early church, the priest prayed the mass facing the people. You can show in some cases, yes. You can show in some cases, no. You can show in some cases facing east was a major concern for the congregation. Something I said earlier, the early church was a good deal more diverse than we just said the early church did this. No, some places they did, some places they didn't. Some places had deaconesses, some places didn't. And deaconesses meant different things in different places. Evidence is ambiguous. It's not just insulated to evidence. This is not going to be, these liturgical issues in particular, they're not going to be solved by appeals to learned liturgical history, because that's ambiguous. And you can have tomes on both sides, some better than others, but quite learned people on both sides. And it's not going to be solved that way. And it's not going to be solved, even worse, it's not going to be solved by mere decree. This is not how Catholics actually work. It is said that Alexander Hamilton expressed anxiety about Catholics in America because they couldn't be trusted politically. They'd always do what the Pope told them to do. And it's said, I don't have my notes in front of me, but it's said that John Adams, who knew more about religion and history than any man living, Jefferson knew about more things. But Adams knew politics, history, and religion.
That's
And
interesting.
it's said that John Adams responded to him, "Don't worry, history shows it's not what Catholics do." They don't do what that's what the Pope
Yeah,
told
they
them.
haven't been keyed into the papacy. Yeah.
They never have done just what the Pope tells them to do. Again, you have to have papal rulings. I was just reading about the torment that the church in France went through in the years of the Jansenist controversy. Do you think that the Pope condemning Jansenism ended the controversy in France?
No.
That's not how things actually work, because you're dealing with deeply held convictions by some very serious people and some educated people. You do have to have rulings, and Catholics have to treat those with respect. But realistically, no. these matters are not resolved by decree. They're not going to be resolved by argument at this stage. Too much, they might have been earlier.
Mhm.
Now there's too much water under the bridge.
Yeah.
Too much angry water
Mm.
under the bridge. For one thing, that's why I say, not only is charity the way forward, that sounds very idealistic, and it is, but it's also practical. At this point, people are so damned mad,
Yeah.
Hmm.
so damned mad.
Because they've suffered real grievances.
They suffered real grievances.
Yeah.
And they've been, yeah, suffered. Oh, yeah, there's a friend of mine whose parish had the traditional Latin Mass in a certain American metropolis under John Paul's indult.
Mm.
So they've been doing it for decades,
Mm.
lawfully, legally, under John Paul's indult.
Mm-hmm.
But then by the terms of Traditionis Custodes, what they've been doing for decades is suddenly squelched.
Illegal.
Things that can't be in parish churches without any advance warning, without serious discussion.
Mm.
I hope that's not badly out of line on my part to say that, but this is not how you do legislation if you want it to be successful. Anyway, people are so damn mad that at this point, not only is charity idealistic,
Mm.
no possibility of any forward motion until people calm down. You need a chance to calm down.
Mm.
And this means we can't have this wild lurching back and forth. That gives you whiplash. It also makes people mad. No, people need a chance to settle down.
Mm.
And that's the very practical side of charity. If you can give them some room because you respect them and you don't want to burden their conscience, a little bit like, in my view, it's a lot like what St. Paul said about meat sacrificed to idols. So problem was in the market, you want to buy meat in the market in Corinth. Where did the meat come from? Did the meat come from an animal that was used in pagan sacrifice?
Mm.
Yeah.
Some Christians said, if that's the case, we can't eat that meat.
Mm.
Others said, it's meat. It's not like it's the fact that it was used in pagan sacrifice
like
somehow contaminates it.
Right.
It's
Not burning it to the idols ourselves.
we're just buying it on the market. What did St. Paul say? He said, basically, you're right. It's just meat. You're not sinning if you buy this meat.
Yes.
But if your brother sees you doing it and he is horrified, you are sinning if you've scandalized your brother.
Mm.
So that needs to be our attitude. We do have our liturgical preferences, and they may be, often are, very well thought out and well defended preferences.
Mhm.
They may be, nonetheless. For the sake of these preferences, I must not, doesn't mean I have to abandon them, but I must not scandalize my brother. I have to be willing to give my brother some room, my sister some room. She wants to wear a veil. Who am I to go up and say, you don't really need to do that, do you? Or even have the attitude, people can be so judgmental, and they can be judgmental paradoxically about feeling judged.
True.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I had, during our listening sessions as part of the synod on synodality, one person actually said, it bothers me when people stay after mass praying. I feel like I'm being judged. What the heck? They're just staying at mass praying. You are being dangerously oversensitive. But
Yeah.
that's where we are. People are too ready to be offended by things that are not remotely meant to be offensive. I'm repeating myself, the only solution is charity. Just calm down. Let them do what they do, as long as it's not violating some basic principles. Let them do it. Leave them alone. Doesn't mean you have to do what they do. Leave them alone. And remember, Remember what the Lord said. He who is not against us is with us.
Mm-hmm.
He also said the opposite at another time, which is very interesting. But I think the first is when he's describing the life of the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
The disciples may do things in a slightly different way, or sometimes a significantly different way. We can live with this, and we can even embrace it as an opportunity for charity.
Mm.
When Parashai was there was a man who would pass through town. He was kind of migratory, up north, back south, and on both trips he'd pass through my place. And every time he came during Mass, don't know why he did it, but every time he came, he'd come during Mass. And at the offertory of the Mass, he would walk up the center aisle and then he would just prostrate himself in front of the altar.
Really?
Yeah, it's very odd.
It is odd.
But I thought, okay, I can interrupt the Mass and make a big deal about getting him to move. And if he's stubborn, I can end up calling the police and this is just going to be obnoxious. And people talk about it and there'll be ill feelings. Or we can just walk around him.
That's what you did?
We did.
That's funny.
Still, the officer was walk around him and he'd be there for a while. Then after communion, he'd get up and go away and resume his migration. That's kind of
That's
the attitude
funny.
we have to have.
Yeah.
We can have a fight about this and just leave bad feelings and a lot of bad feelings right now.
Lots of bad feelings.
We can have a fight about this or we can just
Let it
walk
go.
around it.
That's funny. I mean, it's funny to think about like what would make someone do that, you know? Like,
Yeah. I didn't have a chance to ask him.
oh, really?
Oh, yeah, he'd come always after the start of Mass and he'd walk up the center aisle at the offertory.
Mm.
He'd come into the church after Mass started, he'd be back for a while.
Mhm.
He'd always come up after the bread and wine are brought to the altar.
Interesting.
And then he'd prostrate himself in front of the altar and be there. And then after communion, he'd get up, walk down, and just leave with the rest of the congregation. And then I'd see him 6 months later.
So funny.
The next stage of his north is kind of like a migratory bird at the next stage of his north-south migration.
That is really funny. I mean, I think that's probably the best answer I've heard for like understanding the disagreements with the liturgy, because it normally is just like back and forth, like yelling matches, and it's like, well, we're not really loving anyone.
No, there must. And what did St. Paul say? If I have faith, and they've all got faith, if I have faith great enough to move mountains and have not charity, I am nothing.
Yes.
So these liturgical differences must be, they can actually make us holy if we embrace them with charity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm totally convinced that's the only course open to us now. There's not going to be a Vatican III that'll solve this. Right now, if you had a Vatican III, it'd be homicide.
Yeah.
Right. There'd be blood on the streets of Rome. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. One side would declare they're martyrs, and the other one is yeah. We killed the
insurgents.
Right. We killed the apostates, you know.
We dealt with the insurgents.
Right. We dealt with the insurgents. Yeah.
We dealt with the evil insurgency of June 6th.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Goodness gracious. Have you been following speaking of insurgency? Another drink of
Another
port.
shot.
Yeah. Yeah. Father, I should have warned you. Like,
I-
we're not going to let you off the hook, you know. And what are we going to do? Just talk about the niceties of jiu-jitsu or something like that?
Dangerous.
Yeah. Well, have you been following events in Israel particularly?
Yeah.
You have. What's your reaction, particularly to the as far as I can tell, fairly typical aggression, tactical aggression on the part of the Israeli armed forces, in the face of attacks against their own people. So,
It's enormously, I mean,
it's complicated.
it is.
So
Not as complicated. It is enormously sad. I will say, I am angry above all in this situation, the current situation. Because I'm not ready to, I've been reading about it, but I'm not ready to go off into the roots of this. I'm not going to go back to 1917.
Because at a certain sense, at a certain point, you have to say, well, that's water under the bridge and it's gone.
Yes, more angry water under the bridge.
More angry water under the bridge. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This is the situation today. I'm not going to go back to 1917.
Okay.
And what should have been and should not have been done in 1917 or 1947 or 1967. Situation today. I have to blame Hamas, first of all, simply because deliberate attack on unarmed people, men, women, and children, deliberate lethal attack on unarmed people is always morally wrong, gravely wrong.
Yeah.
You have to start there. Start with the concrete facts in front of you. Okay, context matters, but it goes with something I said earlier. Okay, this criminal who bashed someone's head in, he had a terrible upbringing, awful things happened, blah, blah, blah. He bashed someone's head in. That is the concrete fact in front of us, and that will not stand. So whatever, and a lot could be said about the really messed up saga of Zionism and the formation of Israel. A lot could be said, but whatever could be said about that concrete fact, innocent men, women, and children were deliberately murdered on a large scale. That will not stand. That cannot stand. That has to be dealt with. It cannot be excused. Cannot be excused, cannot be tolerated. Problems the state of Israel faced. And again, has Israel's policy toward the Palestinians been particularly brilliant? No. But state of Israel could not permit a repetition of this. I talked about much earlier, talking for a while, citizens have the right to expect a government to do its basic job. Its most basic job is protecting them. The Israeli government had an absolute duty to prevent this from happening again. Unquestionable duty.
You can't march into neighborhoods and start slaughtering people. And we're going to make sure you know that.
Right. Yeah. Right. This will not happen again. And we're going to do the best. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I have to start with blaming Hamas for an immoral attack. I have to start by saying that Israel needed to respond forcefully to prevent this from happening again. I will go further in blaming Hamas. I think that they knew the Israeli government would respond forcefully. They had to know that. I think they were counting on it. And I think the leadership of Hamas was deliberately planning to use the population of Gaza as a propaganda point. We're going to hold up the coffins of the people the Israelis killed, and we're going to rouse the whole Arab world.
Interesting.
I think it's how they were thinking.
As in, they will come after us for this.
They had to know that.
Our own men, women, and innocent non-combatant men, women, and children will die because of them coming after us, which they will do. And then
we're fine with that.
And the
real some martyrs.
Right. The real war will begin when we convince the world.
Yes. I have no sympathy for the leadership of Hamas. I do have a lot of sympathy for the Palestinian people. I do I do. It's just their need for autonomy
Hmm.
is real.
Hmm.
Their right to autonomy is real.
Hmm.
And that needs to be respected as well. My opinion is that Palestinian leadership has been consistently inept.
Mm.
This goes back before Arafat.
Oh, yes.
Hmm.
Yes. They've been in a different, I keep saying, I don't want to go back to 1917.
The gravitational pull of 1917. Like, we can't avoid it.
Yes, every shitty thing in the rest of the 20th century and into the 21st goes back to World War One. I sometimes think that way. The most stupid thing that highly educated, extremely qualified people ever did.
Mm.
It's one of my, I sometimes argue, you cannot trust the most highly qualified.
Mm.
And one of my main items of evidence for that, Exhibit A, you cannot trust the highly qualified, and democracy is better than meritocracy. Exhibit A for that is World War One. But I don't want to go back to 1917. Resist the poll. Resist the poll. Concrete today.
That's a great maxim for like the study of 20th century history. Be like, I'll always avoid the poll of 1917.
The shittiest year in human history.
Right.
Resist the poll, resist the poll. But Palestinian people deserve better leadership than Hamas. Not only is Hamas not only they acted immorally in the attack, I believe they acted cynically, planning to use the suffering of Gaza as a weapon against Israel. I believe they acted cynically, and I believe they acted foolishly because the rest of the Arab world has other fish to fry.
The rest of the Arab world has sort of, it seems to me, more or less washed their hands of the Palestinian. Again, I'll use Arafat, but it seems like ever since the death of Arafat, the rest of the rest of the Arab world is like, oh, of course we love the Palestinians, but are we going to lift a finger to help?
Yeah, they have problems of their own and other concerns. It's just very foolish to suppose. And then the ineptitude of Hamas. Very foolish then to suppose that the rest of the Arab world, with their own problems and issues, is going to drop everything and dash into this mess, which, by the way, resulted after, this to be emphasized, a really repulsive act by Hamas.
Yes.
But then Hamas, I'm just appalled. I've got levels of being appalled here. Making a deal, establishing contacts with the Iranian government, making the Iranian government their friend. No one with a functioning intellect would do that. Very dangerous ally, utterly unreliable, utterly unreliable, opposed you religiously, militantly Shiite, utterly unreliable. They hate Israel. That's fine. They hate the whole world pretty much. Very dangerous ally. They cannot give you much concrete help. They can get you in concrete trouble. I think that, yeah, I just repeat, the Palestinian people deserve better leadership than this. Where will that better leadership come from? I don't know, but Hamas, no, there's no future there.
Right. Because in a way, they're not really, in a way, Hamas, am I correct in thinking that they're not really interested in leading the Palestinian people? They're interested in scoring certain victories against Israel.
Right.
And that those might be ideological victories, those might be tactical victories, but
right. They make a big deal, and it gives us some encouragement that it's somewhat fashionable to be pro-Palestinian in the West in a way that it wasn't 25, 30 years ago.
Okay.
That's not because of Hamas, I don't think. Partly it's because Israel gets tarred with the brush of Western colonialism.
Hmm.
Partly it's because, people like myself, there is a Palestinian people and some in Israel, I'm not saying all by any means.
Hmm.
Some in Israel, some supporters of Israel actually deny that they're Palestinian people. That just irritates me.
Ah.
Um, they're, but they're there. There is a Palestinian people. They do have a right to self-determination.
Hmm.
They do have a right to some kind of, to use the phrase from 1917, some kind of national homeland. That needs to be noted and not forgotten. So I do have some sympathy.
Hmm.
Palestinian people, but none for Hamas. All in all, not that I'm the great tactical expert. All in all, my impression is the Israeli government has been attempting to deal with Hamas without causing disproportionate civilian casualties.
Mhm.
That's my impression.
Hmm.
But I can't claim expertise in that field.
Right. Right. Well, all right. Well, Tom, we have our assignment for the next guest
We do.
here on the Green Dragon. We got to find a tactical expert
Yeah.
to help us answer some of these questions. I mean, at this point, Israel is a nation of what, 7.5 million people. They're very well established.
Very well established.
Eh,
The
would you-
Zionist experiment worked.
Right.
It's an amazing thing to me to read about, by the way. Not that, darn it, the gravitational pull. Not that the hidden, not hidden, the original sin, so to speak, that has kept the Zionist project from complete success
Hmm.
is that it never really considered seriously the indigenous population and the Palestinian people and their national homeland.
Hmm.
That was the original sin. That said, it's had some tremendously impressive successes, not the least of which is modern Hebrew as a living, effective, powerful vernacular.
Hmm.
I'm enormously impressed by that.
Hmm.
The Irish tried to revive Irish as
Hmm.
a living, effective, modern vernacular, but in practice, it's just something you put up with in school. And there are a few villages that speak it, but in practice, it's something you put up in school. But
Israel is a language that you could learn in order to get to the grocery store and catch the bus.
yeah, very impressive.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
There is something impressive and yet flawed, but impressive about the saga of the state of Israel.
Hmm.
So I do come out, I do come out in the end as a supporter of Israel, but with a caveat.
Hmm.
It's a little like, I force myself to take it.
Fortify yourself with support.
It's a little like the caveat I would make about the United States. A successful saga, but there is the original sin of slavery and smashing the indigenous population with manifest destiny.
Hmm.
And we've never, so it's a beautiful saga on this President's Day, Patriotic Day. And I'll say it, it's a beautiful saga, the American story, but flawed.
Hmm.
It has those two original sins, slavery and the smashing of the indigenous population by manifest destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Israel. Wonderful saga, astonishing, remarkable.
The fact that they fended off so many
well, and then
attacks.
Yes, and the creation of a prosperous, stable nation, the creation of modern Hebrew, which just endlessly impresses me. It's not an easy thing to do. Effectively create a new language and make it an effective vernacular. Yet there's this lurking original sin that flaws
Hmm.
an otherwise extremely impressive project.
Hmm.
But there's not adequate consideration given. to,
What about these other people who live here?
yeah, these other people live here.
Yeah. No.
What about their national homeland?
Right. Oh, troubling indeed.
Yeah.
I know. I know.
That's history for you.
Fascinating though. Yeah.
Yeah. I would, yeah, I've spent some very happy days in Israel, exploring the historical sides.
Country.
Yeah. I do remember feeling as if I got a flavor of the Israeli willingness to defend themselves when I I accidentally bumped an older woman on the metro, on some station, some station platform, and I was probably, I don't know, 28 at the time. And she was probably in her 60s, but she whipped around and gave me a look that said, "Do not mess with me. I will beat you into submission. You try to get onto this train before your turn." And I remember, to this day, I remember the look she gave me and thought, now that is a people ready to fight. So, and that it seems to me, both from my direct experience, but then also what I've read, is that that has also marked the Israeli history in the last 70, 80 years, is that their readiness to fight is,
Oh, yes.
it seems almost unmatched in any other country that I have direct experience of. Oh, yeah,
That's a good point.
but
There was a militancy present in the beginning, and it would never have worked without the militancy. There you go again. Other side of the coin. The ambiguities of history. The United States would not exist. Would not exist apart from the militant drive, which conquered a continent, but also crushed an indigenous population.
suppress the people, yeah, which we're still dealing with the consequences of
Still
that.
dealing with the consequences of it. Impressive achievement, at times heroic achievement, but there's this underside to it. And that's history. It has its ambiguities. I'm more comfortable with the ambiguities than a lot of people are.
That's how you enjoy history.
That's why I enjoy history. Yeah, you have to. My comfort with ambiguities disturbs some people. It does. Right now there's a movie out there, Masters of the Air. It's not movie. It's one of those
Limited series or
Yeah,
something or
yeah,
other.
yeah.
Yeah. Eight-part series on.
ambiguity there. You can celebrate the courage of American aviators in World War II, but what were those bombs doing on the ground? As you wiped out German cities, deliberately attacked the civilian population, but that was fire bombing. By definition, it was not. It was indiscriminate.
Right.
There's an ambiguity there. Yes, Nazi Germany had to be defeated, and yet, does that mean anything goes?
Yeah.
And you have the juxtaposition of brave Americans in the air. The Germans did not take kindly to being bombed. Resistance was pretty fierce. It was a dangerous thing to be. There's just a juxtaposition of those brave Americans in the air with the fact, people burning to death on the ground. Ooh, that is stuff of history.
Right.
That does not mean that our war was not just. Even that just war is not without ambiguities. So I feel, though there are people left and right who think I'm wrong about this, naturally, I think I'm right. Naturally, imagine that. I think that I can celebrate the American achievement while acknowledging the shadow side. I think I can celebrate the achievement of Israel while acknowledging the shadow side.
The shadow side. I think we just found the name for this episode.
The shadow side.
Yeah,
That's
a
the
good
Green
name.
Dragon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the essential stuff of history. If you can appreciate the good while being aware, there's a shadow side. Even a biblical character like David, the hero king.
The hero king.
No doubt about it. The poet king. singing the praises of God.
Yeah.
The priest king leading his people in worship. The shadow side.
Well, that's one of the distinctly modern American storytelling tropes, is that if we reveal the shadow side, I mean, I feel like this is Martin Scorsese's entire filmography. It's like, if I reveal the shadow side, then as we call it, then I want you to conclude that all of the other side was mere facade and charade.
Yes, and that is wrong.
But I feel, yeah,
The fact that there is sin does not mean that the person is a hypocrite. It means the person is human and struggling.
Right.
Flailing.
Sometimes flailing. Well, David expresses that flailing, doesn't he?
Mm.
Have mercy on me, God, in your great kindness, and the goodness of your compassion, blot out my offense.
Yeah.
Thoroughly wash me from my guilt and of my sin, cleanse me. Sometimes flailing. That's the stuff of history. There's still a greatness, there's still a beauty, there's still a glory. And I will still wave the American flag and be extremely pissed off at people who burn it. But I can be aware that it's a human story. The American story is a human story. And as a human story, it's not all heroism. And it's not all honor.
And it's a sort of wishful thinking to try to spin this narrative that it is, right? And you find that too.
You do.
Right. Right. This sort of city on the hill narrative that says, yeah, it was all good.
Basically, we know better. Even in pop culture. I like old Westerns. I really like old Westerns. You know what you see in the old Westerns? Even the ones that are, they vary in quality, obviously. But across the board, even the ones that don't have artistic pretenses, across the board, and I like this about them. I really do. I say this as a native Wyomingite. I remember once in seminary, a priest from Spain having a discussion, and this priest from Spain had the audacity to tell me that I don't think you properly understand how people are in the West. Spain. My ancestors have been in this part of the world for quite a while. So I said, unless you're Native American, don't be more Western than thou with me. This is, that's true for a long time. But I love this part of the world. I'm American, this part of America. What the old Westerns capture, though, is that, yes, it was a glorious achievement, a heroic achievement, and it was messy and flawed. And I think it is possible, sometimes in an artistically skilled way, sometimes in an artistically clumsy way, but still worth the effort to capture both of those.
Capture both.
Both. The wonder of a continent being conquered and made a center of history, center of world history. The wonder of that, and a domain of freedom to which people flocked from literally all the corners of the earth and still continue to flock. There are issues there, but still continue to flock. There's a wonder to this, yet a price is paid. And the price was sometimes paid by innocent people. And we haven't fully paid, how should I put this? We haven't fully fixed some of the messes yet.
Agreed.
Speaking of very human undertakings, how's your jiu-jitsu coming along these days?
Well, of course, less than it used to because of lack of opportunity. Part of it, I only 27 miles from my place to Cody. But that's a half hour there, half hour back. That's an extra hour.
It's an extra hour of everyone's day.
And that takes some real planning. And nonetheless, I get some in.
Yeah.
We're starting to form a group, necessarily somewhat informal. But starting to.
They're in Powell. Very good. No.
Some good people. I found someone. Told Jonathan this yesterday. He has a taste while rolling for rolling music.
Mm.
He has a taste for depressing Irish songs.
I thought it was the only music to roll to, but apparently.
But I found someone whose taste in rolling music is even odder.
Really?
Yeah. Ian Powell, he put on some 12th century organum.
Really?
Oh,
For rolling.
I know.
I guess I would have expected, I don't know, maybe like some Beastie Boys or
Yeah,
You
something.
might have
yeah,
expect- you would
that
not
is-
have expected 12th century organum.
Yeah.
No.
Can we pull that up on the cast right now, or maybe we add it later in
I should
post?
add it later. but-
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
yeah.
how to do
Do we have to have like a moment of silence right now just so like we can add it?
that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So this is your friend, is it Dusty?
Dusty.
Dusty, okay. So Dusty's got an extensive background, so he's had time to pick out the most appropriate combat music.
That's right.
Yeah, so 12th century organum would be.
Taekwondo is really his thing.
Uh-huh.
But along the way, early point in his life before he got into Taekwondo, he did some jujitsu.
Now what's your what's your game? I mean, are you playing the top, you playing the bottom? Are you playing guard? You playing
Oh, top.
top game?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
dominate from the top.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's far better to have my weight and somebody else.
Sure.
A lot of wisdom in
It's
that.
very direct.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, you said you're 59.
Yes.
So typically you're rolling with guys who are 20, 30 years younger.
Oh, yeah. No.
Maybe even more so. So what's your strategies for keeping up with some of that younger energy?
Oh. Well, it'd be different, honestly. It'd be different if the people I'm working with were more accustomed to rolling.
To jiu-jitsu.
Jiu-jitsu.
Okay. All right. To that ground game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as as one of them remarked, very straightforwardly, he said, and get guys, extremely fit. His workout routine is astonishing, maybe like yours. His workout routine is astonishing. He said, I have great cardio, but rolling on the ground. This is different.
Yeah. No, it is uniquely exhausting. I remember
So he said,
my first 90 days of it is, my God.
So honestly, with this group, that hasn't really become an issue yet.
Okay.
Because they're not used to the different kind of, I can't even describe it very well myself. It's just a different kind of endurance.
Yeah.
That's called for, and it's a different kind of stress.
Yeah.
But I am sure about this. You add to the distress, you add to stress, you add to your opponent's stress, and your opponent is having a hard time breathing. And you're going to have a harder time breathing when you're on top of them.
Yes.
Than when they're
on top of you. Yeah. Yeah.
That's definitely part of my strategy.
Right. Just sort of compress the lungs.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
No, he said that. He said he was really kind of analytical, likes to analyze the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, one thing I've gotten used to, he's getting steadily better.
Yeah, that's
one thing I've gotten used to is now I don't panic when I have a hard time breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is the great goal. I mean, I think just the panic inoculation that jiu-jitsu can give you, it really applies very well to all sorts of situations in life. I mean, I remember probably 2 years ago, something like that, middle of winter, and I went off the road. We hit this ice patch right on 80s, so we went off the road.
I-80.
Yeah. We went off the road.
I need more port.
Yeah. Right. And so we went off the road at 80 miles an hour. Right. I mean, so we're spinning, we're seeing the semis, loop in front of my windshield and out of my windshield as I'm looping around. And I remember the distinct lack of panic. And I don't credit that to my temperament. It was like, jiu-jitsu teaches you to think one moment at a time. And, even in the midst of something very chaotic, I'm not crediting myself. I credit jiu-jitsu. I mean, I had a passenger with me, and I just reached over with my spare arm and just like wrapped him in, so that they wouldn't hit their head or get whiplash or so forth. And I remember thinking, Yeah, that's the jujitsu training of, one split second at a time,
Interesting.
right? Rather than sort of the panic of the moment. So, yeah. And then in typical Wyoming fashion, we spun off the road and got ourselves towed back off and continued our drive. Like, yeah, there's nowhere else to go. So you just got to keep,
You're in the middle of nowhere.
you're in the middle of nowhere. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. But you've been working some head and arm triangles, as I understand. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Relatively simple, though, as you point out, there are some subtleties to it.
Yep. Yep.
Relatively simple, and once again, kind of a primitive approach, but once I've, so to speak, cooked someone for a while.
It's not even springing the trap, it's just sort of grinding them down. Yeah.
Then I can move into the head and arm triangle. Their resistance is worn down, and
Hmm.
there's nothing elegant about it.
Well, that's I think one of the, so the 80s, they had a lot of action movies, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Van Damme, right? There was this sort of like,
Yes.
brutal, like, just beat him down in submission, right? And Steven Seagal too. But then there was this concurrent, yeah, and this might have been more 90s, and you might be able to speak to this, is like there was the influx of the Jackie Chan type influence.
All
Yeah.
the kickboxing movies.
Yeah, the kickboxing movies where
Karate movies.
yeah, where everything was elegant. The Karate Kid, Jackie Chan, other all their copycats, right? So I think in the American imagination, martial arts allowed you to be this ballerina
Yes.
where you then beat people up, where it's like, no, real fighting is just, yeah, yeah.
Which is my word, another word of wisdom for tonight, but that's a huge reason to avoid a real fight.
That is a huge reason to avoid a real fight. Yeah.
Messy and unpredictable.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was one striking thing about medieval warfare. You had people like Henry II,
Hmm.
who spent a career as a war leader, was never in a pitched battle.
Mm.
And Richard Lionheart's career as a war leader, only in two, arguably three pitched battles.
When you say pitched battle, what do you mean? As in like a deliberate, like tomorrow morning?
Line up,
Oh, okay.
you line up and the whole army fights,
Okay.
as opposed to lots of reconnaissance and raiding and some skirmishes and sieges.
Ah, sieges. Okay.
And then the raiding and the reconnaissance and the patrolling with the siege, lots of that.
Ye-
Battle was rare. Why? Too darned unpredictable.
Ah,
Going in, you never knew how the darn thing was going to turn out.
ah.
And a real fight, not that I've been in hordes of them, none for a long time now, happily. But a real fight is like that. It is extremely unpredictable.
Hmm.
A sensible person avoids it.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, you just think even just a MMA fight. I mean, some of the most skilled fighting in the world. I mean, there's a ref, there's a ring with very definite dimensions. There's a very definite rule set, right? There's a definite period of prep time, right? And it's still crazy.
Still crazy.
It's still crazy. And think of all the things that have been put under human control, right? You both wear the same things. You both wear the same gloves. There's definitely no weapons involved. Compare that to an altercation in a,
Careful with the surface.
yeah, yep. Compare that to an altercation in a parking lot. Yeah.
Potential for total catastrophe
Yeah.
is far too great.
Mm.
Well, I laugh a little bit. It's grim. We talked about this earlier.
Mm.
I've got a little bit of that grim Irish sense of humor.
Mm.
I laugh a little bit occasionally, not very often. But occasionally, someone will say something to me about, priests look at the world through rose-colored glasses. I want to say, two things. One, I spend a fair amount of my time listening to people talk about their sins. Two, I do funerals, some of which, a fair number of which, I mean, some of them are great grandma Adelaide who died a peaceful death at 100, but a fair number of them.
Mm.
Funerals are really tragic and grim situations.
Mm.
So I've got my collection. I'm not going to get into it now, but I've got my collection of tragic and grim stories.
Hmm.
Those lead me to say quite confidently that run away at full speed if you possibly can, rather than get into a real fight.
Hmm.
Too much is unpredictable. Too much can go wrong.
Hmm.
People can get badly hurt or even killed without anyone having an intention
Hmm.
to start with. So, yeah, avoid. We're talking about true meekness, which is obedience to God and compassion for neighbor. Well, and true manliness is also not this assertive, throw out your chest and throw out your chin so somebody punches it. You have to know when to evacuate.
Hmm.
You know when to leave. And a totally unpredictable, uncontrollable situation is to be avoided if you possibly can. One of the reasons why I decided early on, I can't say that I never bar, but relatively early on in life, early 20s, decided never again.
No bars.
No bars. Because all it takes, how should I put this? A certain number of men, certain percentage of men, not a huge percentage, but not negligible. They get some alcohol in them. They want to fight someone. See this setting in which
And they may pick you.
they may pick you.
Yeah.
Yes, they may pick you. Why? You got this situation, this setting then in which, out of nowhere, apparently, an unpredictable, dangerous situation can arise. I don't say it's probable, but to just once was enough to convince me I never want to be around people drinking unless I know them. That's been my rule ever since. It was like the village pub where I knew everyone in the village.
Yeah, that's a bit, yeah,
That'd
that's a
be
different
different.
schematic. Yeah.
But you know, there are people there are strangers. I don't know how alcohol is going to affect them. I don't want to be around.
Makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
I mean, it never seems like the bar is particularly the best place for, I don't know, the highest form of communication.
No. Partly it's loud music.
Yeah.
Partly it's my brother was in the army for a while in England. Really funny. He got his assignment and his superior said, "You lucky blankety blank." This is some time ago. You could have got Afghanistan, worse, you could have got Texas. Instead, you got Northern England. Reflect on this. What is the difference between the English pub culture and the American bar culture? What went wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us our bar culture. What went wrong?
Right. The pub is the extension of the neighborhood. The bar,
Right.
the bar is the escape from the neighborhood. Yeah. Or perhaps, you know, in America, we don't have neighborhoods the way we did before because of the automobile, which, you know, that's a whole can of worms.
That's another whole can of worms.
Yeah. Yeah. Another shot of port. So, well, Padre, I mean, we really could sit here and pick your brain all day. You know, it's always a great time to have you down here in Lander. Yeah. You know, it's and it's for the most part worth listening to. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's always.
Always have love talking.
Yeah.
My first grade teacher did not appreciate this.
Yeah. No, it always is a pleasure to have you and pick your brain and just hear some of the experience. So
talk with you and with you, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father.
But yeah, Tom, thanks for putting this on and helping bring us all, the three of us, together. So.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And if you'd ever be willing to come back on, Father, we'd love to have you.
Love to do it.
Yeah, there's a whole array. We didn't really get to medieval history, which is how did that happen?
Oh,
Yeah.
I made a couple of allusions.
Yeah. Right. We alluded to medieval history. Yeah, we got distracted with.
But I did avoid getting hopelessly sucked into 1970.
Yeah. Right. We avoided. Yeah. We avoided the great gravitational pull of the black hole of 1970. So
human history, and yet that was the year that Our Lady appeared at Fatima.
Ah. Yeah,
As
there's
if to say,
hope yet.
even now, God has not abandoned us.
There's hope yet.
There's hope yet.
So Father, if people want to follow you a little bit more, I mean, I know, sometimes you put homilies out on your Facebook, sometimes you've put homilies in print, through an email list. Is there a way that listeners could perhaps tap into some of the things you're offering?
Ooh. Well, let's see. We do live stream most Sundays at 9 a.m. Mass at St. Barbara's in Powell.
St. Barbara's and Powell. Okay. Yeah.
I do have the homilies on the website.
Okay.
And I'm going to attempt, although I am, while verbally adept, technologically retarded, I'm going to attempt doing sermons via YouTube.
Oh,
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, you can help me with that.
yeah, we can definitely help.
The Green Dragon can step up to the plate.
Yeah.
So, okay, muy bien. So St. Barbara's in Powell,
Oh,
Wyoming, website.
That's a nice
Okay.
place. 27 miles from Cody, which itself is 27 miles from Yellowstone Park.
Ah,
So you come to Cody, you are within range of
yeah, you are.
the wonders of Yellowstone.
Okay, yeah. Well, come and see the wonders in Yellowstone, and then come hear a homily at St. Barbara's with
Homily?
Padre James.
Appreciate the astonishingly clean streets of Powell.
Yes. I've been a witness to that.
Different towns have different personalities. Part of Powell's personality is it likes clean streets.
Really?
Oh, it's remarkable. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. You could picnic in any parking spot. It's really something else. So, well, good. Well, maybe we'll have to host a podcast up there someday.
That'd be
In the
good.
meantime, everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to throw this cast out there, and we hope you have you at the next Fireside Chat.
Yeah. Until then.
God bless.